February 14, 1945. 4:47 in the morning. The Hürtgen Forest, a frozen hell on the German border. Staff Sergeant Marcus Donovan, 23 years old, from the steel mills of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, huddles in a shallow foxhole scraped out of the icy ground. It's just 30 yards from a heavily fortified German bunker complex, a network of concrete and earthworks bristling with weapons. His hands, numb from the biting cold, clutch the grip of his M3 submachine gun, the one the GIs nicknamed the grease gun because it looked more like a mechanic's tool than a battlefield killer. The metallic tang of fear coats his tongue, sharp and unrelenting. He's got a standard 30-round magazine loaded, with a few spares in his pouches. Across from him, the Germans have an MG42 machine gun, that infamous Hitler's buzzsaw, capable of spitting out 1,200 rounds per minute. The odds are stacked against him like a bad poker hand. His squad has been pinned down here for over 40 minutes now, the air thick with the acrid smell of cordite and the cries of the wounded. 3 of his men are already down, sprawled in the snow, their blood staining the white ground red. The MG42 opens up again, that terrifying sound like canvas being torn apart by giant hands, a noise that sends chills through every American soldier's spine. Donovan flattens himself against the frozen dirt, his breath visible in the pre-dawn gloom like ghostly whispers. He can hear Lieutenant Foster barking orders for covering fire, his voice hoarse and desperate. The weight of the moment presses down on Donovan harder than the cold. He glances at his grease gun again, standard issue, 30 rounds, firing at about 450 rounds per minute on a good day. 4 spare magazines mean maybe 150 rounds total if he's lucky. It's a drop in the bucket against that fortified position. Then, out of the corner of his eye, he spots Private First Class Donald Williams, just 20 feet to his left, crouched behind a fallen log. Williams is holding something that makes Donovan's eyes widen despite the terror gripping him. It's a grease gun, but modified, 3 magazines welded together side by side, forming a bulky, improvised triple stack. 90 rounds ready to go without a single reload. Williams catches Donovan's stare, flashes a grim smile through the grime caked on his face, and mouths 2 words, "Watch this." By early 1945, the American forces pushing into Germany were facing a dire crisis that could have stalled the entire Allied advance and cost thousands more lives before the war's end. The M3 submachine gun, officially the United States submachine gun, caliber .45, M3, had been rushed into production in late 1942 as a cheaper, simpler alternative to the iconic but costly Thompson submachine gun. At just $20 a unit versus the Thompson's whopping $200, and weighing only 8 pounds empty compared to the Thompson's heavier 10.6 pounds, the M3 was a triumph of wartime mass production. Its stamped metal construction and blowback operation made it reliable in mud, snow, and dust, earning it a place in the hands of infantry, paratroopers, and tank crews alike. But as the war dragged on, especially after the Normandy landings in June 1944, the brutal realities of fighting the Wehrmacht on their home turf exposed glaring weaknesses. The Germans, hardened by years of combat on the Eastern Front against the Soviets, had perfected a defensive strategy built around interlocking fields of fire from well-entrenched positions. Their MG42, with its quick-change barrel and belt-fed ammunition, could sustain devastating rates of fire without pause, turning open ground into killing fields. In places like the Hürtgen Forest, a dense, hilly woodland spanning the Belgian-German border, American troops endured some of the bloodiest fighting of the European theater. From September 1944 to February 1945, the campaign claimed over 33,000 American casualties, 24,000 wounded, 9,000 killed or missing. Infantry squads, typically armed with M1 Garand rifles for longer-range fire and a smattering of M3 grease guns or Thompsons for close-quarters suppression, found themselves outgunned in the dense underbrush and fortified lines. The core issue boiled down to firepower sustainability. The M3's standard box magazine held just 30 rounds of .45 ACP ammunition. At its cyclic rate of around 450 rounds per minute, that meant a mere 6 to 7 seconds of continuous fire before the gun ran dry. Reloading under fire was a nightmare, fumbling with pouches, ejecting the empty mag, slamming in a new one, all while exposed to enemy bullets. In contrast, a German MG42 team could lay down suppressive fire for minutes on end, only pausing briefly to swap barrels if overheating became an issue. American squad tactics, rooted in fire and maneuver doctrine, relied on one element providing covering fire while another advanced in bounds. But when your suppressing fire petered out after a handful of seconds, the advancing team was left hanging in no man's land, easy targets for the unrelenting German machine guns. The Battle of the Bulge in December 1944 amplified this nightmare. Hitler's last-ditch Ardennes offensive slammed into American lines, forcing brutal close-quarters battles in snow-choked forests. Units like the 106th Infantry Division suffered catastrophic losses, over 8,000 men in the first 3 days alone. Survivors' after-action reports painted a grim picture, repeated failures to suppress German positions due to insufficient automatic fire duration. One report from a platoon leader in the 99th Infantry Division noted, "Our submachine gunners expended magazines too quickly, allowing enemy MGs to resume fire during reloads, resulting in heavy casualties among advancing elements." Back at 1st Army Headquarters, the stack of reports grew through January 1945. Company commanders, like Captain James Hicks of Company C, 26th Infantry Regiment, documented the toll with stark clarity. In assaults on pillboxes and bunkers, magazine changes on our M3s increased friendly exposure by 40 to 50%, leading to unnecessary losses. Enemy automatic weapons exploit these gaps mercilessly. Urgent need for enhanced firepower capacity. The math was merciless and unforgiving. A single 30-round magazine at 450 revolutions per minute equated to about 6 seconds of full auto. A proficient soldier might reload in 4 to 6 seconds, but in the chaos of combat, cold fingers, incoming fire, adrenaline, that window often stretched longer. German gunners, with their belt-fed weapons, faced no such interruptions, pouring lead through those vulnerable moments. The U.S. Ordnance Department, aware of the problem since late 1944, initiated studies and prototypes for extended magazines or drum systems. But bureaucracy moved at a glacial pace. Testing protocols, committee approvals, production retooling, all could take months, if not longer. Meanwhile, on the front lines, men were dying by the dozens in assaults that bogged down for want of sustained suppression. Formal channels weren't delivering solutions fast enough, so the ingenuity of American soldiers and armorers took over. In makeshift workshops behind the lines, from Verviers in Belgium to Düren in Germany, frontline units began experimenting with field-expedient modifications to bridge the firepower gap. If you want to dive deeper into how these battlefield hacks turned the tide in those final, grueling months, stick around. These tales of grit and innovation from the greatest generation are the kind that history books often overlook, but they saved lives and helped end the war. Back to that frozen foxhole in the Hürtgen Forest. The innovation that caught Donovan's eye that morning was the triple magazine modification, a crude but brilliant hack that started popping up in U.S. infantry units around January 1945. Historians debate its exact origins. Some trace it to the armory of the 1st Infantry Division, the Big Red One, in Verviers, where skilled welders and mechanics tinkered under the pressure of incoming casualty reports. Others point to the 9th Infantry Division's maintenance teams near Düren, who drew inspiration from similar jury-rigged setups seen on captured Soviet weapons from the Eastern Front. Regardless of who welded the first one, by early February, word of the mod spread like wildfire through the ranks of the First Army, from platoon sergeants swapping stories in chow lines to company commanders requisitioning materials for their own units. The design was elegantly simple, born of necessity rather than engineering finesse. 3 standard 30-round M3 magazines were welded together side by side into a single, rigid unit, creating a 90-round capacity beast. The total loaded weight came in around 4.2 pounds, 3 times a single mag, but that was a trade-off soldiers were willing to make. The magazines were positioned parallel, with slight offsets to ensure the feed lips aligned properly with the M3's magazine well. Armorers used whatever was at hand. Arc welders scrounged from vehicle repair kits, acetylene torches liberated from engineering units, even basic spot welding rigs powered by generators. The welds didn't have to be pretty, they just needed to withstand the jolts of combat, mud, and rough handling. To reinforce the assembly, thin metal plates were often added to the front and back, or steel straps wrapped around for extra rigidity. In some cases, Wire bindings sufficed if welding gear was scarce. Precision was key in one area: the feed angle. The M3's magazine well demanded exact insertion for reliable feeding. The center magazine in the triple stack had to lock in perfectly, while the sides could afford minor shifts. But the real engineering hurdle was weight distribution. Hanging 4.2 pounds off the sheet metal receiver of the M3, never designed for such stress, risked bending the housing or cracking welds. Early prototypes failed spectacularly in test firings, with magazines drooping or detaching mid-burst. Armorers countered this with clever fixes: curved steel reinforcement plates bolted or welded to the forward grip area to spread the load, leather straps or canvas slings running from the barrel jacket to the magazine base for forward weight transfer, even extended handguards that braced the assembly. These tweaks turned a kludgy idea into a battlefield reliable tool. Operationally, the triple mag worked on a straightforward principle: deliver sustained fire without the deadly pause of reloading. A soldier could unleash 90 rounds in one go, about 12 seconds of continuous full auto at the M3's rate, or far longer with disciplined bursts. In practice, it meant suppressing an enemy position through an entire squad advance, keeping heads down and allowing maneuvers that were previously suicidal. Lieutenant Colonel Robert Hayes of the 18th Infantry Regiment witnessed one of the first live tests on January 28, 1945, near Verviers. In a declassified letter from his personal papers, he recalled, "It looked absurd, like a Frankenstein's monster of magazines jutting out awkwardly. But when the sergeant let loose, I timed it. Over 20 seconds of steady fire before he even thought about switching. The captain next to me just stared. We'd never seen a grease gun hold out like that." The nickname Endless Storm didn't come from the Americans, it originated with captured German troops. In interrogations throughout February and March, Wehrmacht and Waffen-SS prisoners repeatedly described the modified weapons with awe and dread. One, Gefreiter Hans Kleist from the 12th Volksgrenadier Division, told his captors on March 3, "We called them the Endloser Sturm guns. The Americans fired without end. We counted rounds like always, expecting the pause, but it never came. It broke our lines. Men panicked under that relentless hail. By mid-February, demand exploded. The 1st Infantry Division's armory in Verviers processed over 400 minutes and 3 seconds for conversion in the first week alone, churning out 127 triple mag assemblies despite material shortages. The 9th Division's shop in Düren managed 218 between February 5 and 28. Procedures standardized quickly through shared know-how: carry the modded gun as primary, with single spares for backups, avoid combat reloads of the triple unit itself, instead, use it for those make-or-break suppression moments. February 14, 1945, 4:48 hours. Donovan watches as Williams rises deliberately from cover, the triple mag grease gun braced at his hip. At 19, Williams is barely out of high school from Youngstown, Ohio, but there's no hesitation in his step. The ungainly triple stack gleams faintly in the dim light, 90 rounds of .45 caliber punch ready. He doesn't charge blindly, he advances with purpose, using the trees for partial cover. The MG42 nest hasn't spotted him yet, its barrel sweeping the main squad position. Donovan tenses, knowing the shift in odds. Williams has enough fire to cover a full advance. The German gunner traverses, spots the movement, and the buzzsaw erupts. But Williams is faster. His grease gun coughs to life, a steady thump-thump-thump echoing through the woods. Tracers streak toward the bunker, every fifth round glowing orange in the dark. 40 yards out, Williams keeps walking, firing controlled bursts. 10 seconds in, 30 to 40 rounds gone, but no pause. The MG42 stutters, its crew ducking as bullets ping off the concrete slit. Donovan sees shadows shifting inside, Germans trying to readjust. Williams pours it on, another burst forcing them down. Lieutenant Foster seizes the moment. "Cover them, move, move." Donovan vaults from his hole, 6 others joining him in the rush. Lungs burning in the cold air, they close the gap, 35 yards, 30, 25. Williams is still firing, the sound unbroken, pinning the enemy. By the 30-second mark, he's burned through 60 rounds, but the squad's at grenade range. Foster lobs the first Mark II frag through the aperture. Boom, muffled screams. 2 more follow, and the MG42 falls silent for good. Total elapsed time, 48 seconds. American losses, none in this push. Germans, 6 dead, 3 wounded, for surrendering with hands high. As the smoke clears, Donovan inspects Williams' weapon up close. The welds are solid, no jams, 90 rounds delivered flawlessly. Captain Hicks, surveying the captured bunker, immediately requests a dozen more for the company. By nightfall, Donovan has his own triple-mag grease gun, the weight feeling like security in his hands. 2 days later, February 16, 1945, 1,320 hours. The village of Schmidt, Germany, a cluster of shattered brick buildings and rubble-choked streets just beyond the Hürtgen Forest. Company C, 1st Battalion, 26th Infantry Regiment, is tasked with clearing a German-held factory complex. Intelligence estimates 40 to 60 enemy troops dug in across 4 interconnected buildings, with excellent fields of fire from upper windows and fortified cellars. Standard doctrine calls for heavy artillery preparation or tank support to soften the position before an infantry assault. Neither is available today. The guns are supporting another push 5 miles north, and the ground is too broken for armor to maneuver effectively. Captain James Hicks gathers his platoon leaders behind a bombed-out farmhouse. The plan is grimly straightforward, a direct assault with what they have on hand. But this time, something is different. 4 men in the company now carry triple-magazine grease guns: Staff Sergeant Donovan, Private Williams, Corporal Jimmy Diaz from Texas, and Private First Class Robert Chen from California. 4 weapons with 90 rounds each, a total of 360 rounds of sustained .45 caliber fire before any reload. Hicks assigns them as the base of fire element. The mathematics have shifted just enough to give the assault a fighting chance. Donovan and Williams take position behind the twisted remains of a German half-track 30 yards from the main 3-story factory building. Diaz and Chen flank 20 yards to the right, using a collapsed wall for cover. The rest of the platoon, Sergeant Harold Wade leading 6 riflemen and grenadiers, prepares to cross the open ground on the left side of the street. They need 20 seconds. 20 seconds of unbroken suppression to reach the base of the wall without being cut down. The assault kicks off at 13:25 sharp. Donovan opens first, squeezing off a controlled 10-round burst into the second-floor windows where muzzle flashes had flickered moments earlier. The grease gun's slow, deliberate thump-thump-thump echoes across the ruined village. Williams joins a second later, his bursts walking across the ground-floor doorways. Diaz and Chen open up from the right, their tracers crisscrossing the facade like angry red hornets. Brick dust erupts in clouds as hundreds of .45 slugs slap into the walls. The impacts don't penetrate deep into reinforced positions, but they don't need to. The sheer volume keeps every German head down. Inside the factory, the defenders try to respond. A pair of MP-40s poke out from corner windows, spitting short bursts toward the American base of fire. But the moment barrels appear, 4 grease guns answer at once. The combined roar is overwhelming, 40 rounds pouring in every few seconds. German fire falters, then stops. 10 seconds into the fight, no American has reloaded. 15 seconds, no one has even come close to emptying the first magazine. Wade's assault team is already halfway across the kill zone, sprinting in bounds from crater to crater. At the 18-second mark, a German MG42 on the 3rd floor tries to traverse toward the moving rifleman. Donovan spots the movement first. He shifts aim and holds the trigger longer, 15 rounds in one continuous rip. The heavier slugs spark off the window frame, forcing the gunner to duck. Williams follows with another burst. The MG42 never gets a shot off. Wade's team slams against the factory wall at 21 seconds, breathless but untouched. Now the real close work begins. Wade slaps a grenade against the nearest ground floor window, pulls the pin, and ducks. The blast showers the street with glass and brick fragments. 2 more grenades sail into adjacent openings. The assault element flows through the breaches like water, rifles and Thompsons at the ready for room-to-room fighting. Upstairs, the 4 triple-mag gunners keep the pressure on, shifting fire to upper windows to prevent reinforcements from moving down. Donovan pauses to assess. He's fired roughly 40 rounds, still 50 left in his triple assembly. Williams is in similar shape. Diaz and Chen call out that they're good for another full minute of fire if needed. The grease gun's relatively low cyclic rate, around 450 rounds per minute, proves a blessing here. It allows better control and ammunition conservation compared to the faster Thompson, while still delivering punishing volume. Inside, the fighting is brutal but brief. German defenders, expecting the usual American pattern of short bursts followed by vulnerable reload pauses, are thrown off by the unrelenting hail from outside. They can't man windows long enough to aim properly. By 13:47 hours, just 22 minutes after the assault began, the main building is declared secure. Company losses: 2 lightly wounded from grenade fragments inside. Enemy toll: 14 dead, 21 captured, and an estimated 15 who slipped out the rear into the next block. During prisoner processing, battalion intelligence officers interview a shaken Oberfeldwebel Friedrich Weber from the 89th Infantry Division. Through an interpreter, he describes the assault from the German side. "We knew the American submachine guns, 30 rounds, then silence while they changed magazines. We waited for that silence to shoot. But today there was no silence. One man alone fired for half a minute without stopping. When we tried to aim, more fire came from everywhere. It was impossible to fight back. Many men simply stayed down until your soldiers were inside." Word of these successes travels fast. Throughout late February and into March, units equipped with triple magazine grease guns report measurable drops in casualties during assaults on fortified positions. The 26th Infantry Regiment's operations log tracks the difference with cold precision. Across 43 documented engagements between February 14th and March 30th, pre-modification assaults averaged 4.2 friendly casualties per bunker or strongpoint cleared. After wider distribution of the triple mag weapons, that average fell to 2.8, a 33% reduction. Not every assault had the new weapons, but in those that did, the pattern held: fewer men exposed during critical moments, fewer gaps for German gunners to exploit. On March 3, 1945, 1st Army Headquarters finally acknowledges the phenomenon in Field Memorandum 445. The document doesn't outright authorize the modification. Bureaucracy still needs time to catch up, but it formally recognizes the practice and issues guidelines for safer fabrication. Minimum weld tensile strength: 400 pounds. Maximum assembly weight: 4.5 pounds loaded. Mandatory function testing: 100 rounds continuous without stoppage. Magazines must come from the same manufacturer lot to ensure consistent spring tension and feed lip dimensions. The memo spreads through division ordnance channels like a green light wrapped in caution tape. Production, however, remains decentralized and frantic. Division-level armories become makeshift factories. The 1st Infantry Division at Verviers fabricates 847 triple assemblies between early February and the end of April. The 9th Division turns out 623. The 2nd Infantry Division manages 512. Smaller units cobble together dozens more in regiment-level shops. By conservative estimates, between 3,200 and 3,800 modified M3s see service with 1st Army units before the war's end. Supply realities limit even wider adoption. Every triple assembly consumes 3 standard magazines that could otherwise serve as spares. Some commanders prioritize them for squad automatic weapons roles or designated suppressors. Others distribute more broadly to any soldier carrying a grease gun. Maintenance challenges emerge quickly. The extra 2.8 pounds hanging off the magazine well accelerates wear on the thin sheet metal receiver. Spot welds crack under repeated recoil stress. Feed ramps and extractors show higher failure rates. Armory records indicate roughly 40% more armor hours required per modified weapon compared to standard M3s. Soldiers accept the trade-off without complaint. A gun that needs extra cleaning but keeps you alive is infinitely preferable to one that's pristine in a body bag. The Germans adapt as best they can under growing material shortages. Captured Wehrmacht intelligence summaries from March 1945 warn of enhanced American submachine gun sustained fire capability. One document from LXXXII Corps, dated March 18, advises defenders to assume suppression will continue through normal assault timelines and recommends deeper overhead cover and offset firing ports. Tactical shifts appear in the field. Several reports note German units abandoning forward positions when American infantry closes to 75 yards or less, citing fear of that unbroken automatic fire. As First Army surges across the Rhine at Remagen on March 7, the pace of advance accelerates into the German heartland. Urban combat intensifies, street by street in places like Aachen, Cologne, and Essen. Here, the triple-magazine grease gun proves even more valuable. Clearing teams develop new techniques. One man with a modified weapon at each entry point, pouring sustained bursts into rooms and hallways to pin occupants while assault elements breach and clear. Technical Sergeant Raymond Tucker of the 16th Infantry Regiment, fighting through Cologne at the end of March, later recalled, "We'd stack at a doorway, and the triple-mag guy would open up, 10-round bursts, pause just long enough to listen, then more fire. Kept every crowd head down and hands off triggers. Before, we'd lose a man or two on almost every room. With that sustained cover, we started coming out whole." German salvage yards yield evidence of attempted countermeasures. Several captured MP40 submachine guns appear with crude dual magazine clamps, two 32-round magazines taped or wired side by side for 64-round capacity. The concept mirrors the American innovation, but execution is cruder and capacity lower. By spring 1945, German industry lacks the resources to mass-produce even this limited response. American armories, backed by an intact industrial base, continue churning out standard magazines for conversion. The triple magazine's engineering details reveal just how much thought went into these field-expedient hacks. The M3 operates on simple blowback, a heavy bolt driven rearward by cartridge pressure, then flung forward by a recoil spring to chamber the next round. Cyclic rate is governed purely by bolt mass and spring strength, nothing more complex. The standard magazine is a straightforward single stack box with a spring-loaded follower pushing rounds upward into the bolt's path. The modification changes none of that internal mechanism. It simply triples ammunition availability in one insertable unit. Soldiers load all 3 magazines before combat. 90 rounds of .45 ACP takes an experienced man about 6 minutes with a loading tool or by hand. Most configurations feed from the center magazine first. When empty, the soldier rotates the entire assembly 90 degrees in the well, 3 seconds versus 4 to 6 for a full magazine change, bringing a fresh side magazine into feeding position. A second rotation accesses the third. Weight remains the persistent headache. Early failures saw receivers bend or welds shear from the torque of a swinging 4.2-pound assembly. Field fixes evolve rapidly. 40% of modified weapons receive welded or bolted steel reinforcement plates around the magazine housing. 30% use leather or canvas support straps from barrel jacket to magazine base. Transferring load forward. 15% incorporate extended lower handguards or grip plates to brace the assembly. 10% combine multiple methods. Roughly 5% go into combat with nothing but the basic weld. Those show the highest malfunction rates. Reliability holds up surprisingly well. Standard M3s experience about 0.8 stoppages per 1,000 rounds under field conditions, mostly failures to feed or eject. Triple mag versions clock around 1.1%, the slight increase traceable to welding distortion of feed lips, mismatched spring tensions, or debris in the extra magazine wells. Soldiers develop habits to mitigate, fire in 5 to 10 round bursts rather than full auto, clear the chamber and inspect after every engagement, check weld integrity before stepping off, and mark magazines with paint bands to track usage. The .45 ACP round itself, 230 grain bullet at roughly 850 feet per second, delivers devastating stopping power at room distances but lacks penetration against cover. The triple magazine compensates through sheer volume. Where a standard grease gun forces precise shooting, the modified version allows area suppression, increasing hit probability even under stress. Comparisons with enemy weapons highlight the tactical edge. A German MP40 with 32-round magazine offers about 3.6 seconds of continuous fire at 500 rounds per minute. The MP43/STG-44 assault rifle, with its 30-round detachable box, manages similar duration. An American triple-mag M3 provides up to 30 seconds continuous or several minutes of controlled tactical fire, the difference between losing a firefight and winning it outright. As winter turns to spring, the writing is on the wall for the Third Reich. The triple-magazine grease gun becomes one small but meaningful piece of the overwhelming material and tactical superiority that finally crushes German resistance in the West. April 1945 arrives with the scent of impending victory in the air. First Army races eastward across the crumbling Reich, bridging rivers, encircling pockets of resistance, and liberating towns that only weeks earlier seemed impregnable. The Ruhr pocket collapses in mid-April, trapping over 300,000 German troops. As the noose tightens, the pace of combat shifts from deliberate forest assaults to rapid urban sweeps and road marches. Yet even in this final sprint, the triple-magazine grease gun continues to prove its worth, especially in the house-to-house fighting that characterizes the advance through western Germany's industrial cities. In Cologne, already battered by Allied bombing, remnants of the 3rd Panzergrenadier Division and assorted Volkssturm units cling to rubble strongpoints. The 16th Infantry Regiment pushes through the shattered streets block by block. Technical Sergeant Raymond Tucker's platoon develops a rhythm that becomes standard across many units. One triple-mag gunner per breach team. As the stack forms at a doorway or shattered window, the modified grease gun opens up first, long, deliberate bursts sweeping the interior to drive defenders away from firing positions. Only then do the riflemen and grenadiers enter, moving fast under the umbrella of that sustained fire. Tucker later estimates his platoon clears twice as many buildings per day with half the casualties compared to earlier street fighting in Aachen the previous autumn. Similar stories echo from other divisions. In Essen, the 9th Infantry Division encounters factory complexes turned into mini-fortresses. Triple-mag teams suppress rooftop machine gun nests long enough for engineers to blow breaches in walls or for bazooka men to close to effective range. In Dusseldorf, elements of the 8th Infantry Division use the weapons to pin riverbank defenders while assault boats cross the Rhine under fire. The pattern repeats. Wherever close-range suppression is needed for more than a few seconds, the ungainly but effective modification shines. By this stage, the triple magazine has evolved beyond its crude origins. Armories incorporate lessons learned from 2 months of hard use. Reinforcement plates become standard rather than optional. Some units experiment with quick-release pins or clamps to allow faster rotation between magazines, though most stick with the welded design for reliability. A few innovative armorers even add rudimentary sights or cheek rests to improve aimed fire with a heavier assembly, though these remain rare. Ammunition conservation techniques spread widely. Soldiers learn to fire in 5 to 8 round bursts, pausing just long enough to assess effect before resuming. The M3's slow cyclic rate, far gentler than the Thompson's blistering pace, makes this practical, extending the 90 rounds across minutes of tactical fire rather than seconds of waste. German prisoners continue to mention the weapons with a mix of resentment and respect. A captured Hauptmann from the 116th Panzer Division, interrogated near Remagen in early April, complains bitterly, "Your soldiers no longer give us the pause we need. With our MP40s we could wait for the American to reload, then traverse and shoot. Now they fire as if they have belts like our MG42s. It forces us to stay down too long, and by then your infantry is already inside our positions." Another prisoner, a young grenadier from the 352nd Volksgrenadier Division, describes watching an American soldier advance across a street while firing continuously from the hip. "He walked like he owned the ground. The gun never stopped. We could not lift our heads." The tactical impact extends beyond individual assaults. German commanders, facing ammunition shortages and disintegrating supply lines, grow increasingly reluctant to contest urban blocks at close quarters. Multiple divisional reports from late March and April note enemy units withdrawing rather than standing when American infantry closes to submachine gun range. The psychological effect compounds the material one. Defenders know that committing to a close defense risks being overwhelmed by fire they cannot match. Yet limitations persist. The added weight, nearly 3 extra pounds on an already front-heavy weapon, tires soldiers during long advances. Receiver cracks become common enough that some units rotate modified guns among soldiers to spread the wear. Mud and urban dust clog the exposed magazine wells more readily than standard single magazines. As the war in Europe enters its final weeks, the urgent imperative that birthed the triple magazine begins to fade. On May 8, 1945, VE Day, Germany surrenders unconditionally. The shooting stops, and the massive task of occupation and demobilization begins. Theater priorities shift overnight from combat effectiveness to logistics, maintenance economy, and preparing units for possible redeployment to the Pacific, though Japan's surrender in August renders even that moot. In July 1945, First Army issues directives for weapons disposition. Modified M3s are to be returned to standard configuration. Welds cut, magazines separated, reinforcement plates removed. The reasoning is pragmatic. Occupation duties, guarding facilities, patrolling towns, managing displaced persons, require reliable but low-maintenance arms. The triple assemblies increase wear rates and complicate spare parts tracking. Moreover, the Army's vast stockpiles now include newer designs like the M1 and M2 carbines, which are gradually replacing the grease gun in many roles. Many soldiers resist. Stories circulate of triple mag weapons lost in paperwork, accidentally damaged beyond repair, or quietly crated for shipment home in footlockers despite regulations. A few make it stateside as war trophies, hidden among personal gear. Most, however, are dutifully disassembled in ordnance depots across Germany and France. By October 1945, fewer than 100 remain in official inventory, concentrated with military police units in occupied zones where the visual intimidation of the bulky magazines proves useful for crowd control. The Korean War brings a brief flicker of renewed interest. When conflict erupts in June 1950, some older armorers and reservists recall the World War II modification. In 1951 and 1952, scattered attempts appear in theater workshops to recreate triple or even quadruple magazine setups on remaining M3 stocks. But by then the grease gun itself is obsolescent. The M1/M2 carbine dominates infantry use, and newer automatic weapons like the early bar variants and emerging squad automatic designs point toward belt-fed solutions. The field expedient hack from 1945 does not return in any meaningful numbers. Official Army small arms development never formally adopts the concept. Research shifts toward purpose-built weapons with higher capacity from the ground up, extended magazines, drums, belts. The triple magazine remains an unclassified footnote, neither secret nor celebrated, simply a practical solution for a specific moment that passed. Today, surviving examples are rare and prized among collectors. Most are legally registered under the National Firearms Act as transferable machine guns, their provenance meticulously documented. Authentication requires expertise. Original welds show wartime haste and available materials, arc splatter, uneven beads, mismatched magazine dates from 1943 to 1945 production. Reinforcement plates often bear unit markings or armorer stamps. Modern reproductions exist, but lack the patina of combat use and period-correct details. Museums preserve a handful. The National World War II Museum in New Orleans displays a well-provenanced example donated by a 1st Infantry Division veteran. West Point's museum holds 2 in storage, one from the 9th Division with leather support straps still attached. The Smithsonian's military collection catalogs one under accession number 2007.01564, complete with field-applied reinforcement and faded paint marks indicating magazine sequence. Staff Sergeant Marcus Donovan returns to Pittsburgh in September 1945. He works 42 years at U.S. Steel, raises 3 children, and coaches Little League on weekends. In his attic sits a faded photograph, his squad in Germany, for men proudly holding triple magazine grease guns. When grandchildren ask about the war, he points to the picture and says quietly, "That awkward-looking thing saved my life more times than I can count." Simple idea, but it worked when we needed it most. Private Donald Williams, the 19-year-old who walked into machine gun fire on Valentine's Day 1945, receives the Silver Star for that action and others. He comes home to Youngstown, opens a successful hardware store, and serves on the city council. His service records remain locked in a bank-safe deposit box until his death in 2008. In the 1980s and 1990s, he visits schools to speak about the war. Asked what memory stands clearest after all the years, he always answers the same: the sound of 90 rounds going out without a single pause. That sound meant we were coming home. Lieutenant Colonel Robert Hayes retires as a full colonel in 1961. His personal papers, donated to the U.S. Army Heritage and Education Center in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, contain the most detailed contemporary documentation of the modification's birth and spread: letters, sketches, test reports, photographs. His February 1945 correspondence captures the urgency and pride of those weeks. Men in frozen workshops welding steel under lantern light because lives depended on it the next morning. The story of the triple-magazine grease gun never becomes widely known outside specialized military history circles. It lacks the glamour of wonder weapons or famous battles. The men who carried them rarely spoke of the modification specifically. It was just another tool, like a better entrenching shovel or an extra canteen. The guns themselves mostly vanished, cut apart and recycled into the vast post-war surplus system. But the principle endures. Modern infantry doctrine still revolves around sustained suppressive fire-enabling maneuver, the exact problem those welded magazines solved in 1945. Today's M249 squad automatic weapon, feeding from 200-round belts or boxes, provides the same capability with greater refinement. Door gunners on helicopters, gunners on vehicles, designated marksmen with belt-fed rifles, all trace their tactical role back to the need filled by 3 magazines welded together in a Belgian workshop 80 years ago. The German prisoners who named it Endloser Sturm, endless storm, grasped the essence. War at the small unit level often comes down to seconds. Who can keep shooting while the other must pause, who can advance while the enemy ducks. In the final months of the European campaign, American soldiers changed that equation with a simple, unauthorized, brilliantly effective improvisation. They didn't need permission from Washington or months of testing. They needed 90 rounds without stopping, and they built it themselves. These stories of ingenuity under extreme pressure deserve remembrance. The armorers working through the night with limited tools. The young men carrying heavier weapons because those weapons brought their friends home. The quiet heroism of solving lethal problems with whatever was at hand. If this account has given you a deeper appreciation for the resourcefulness that helped win the war, stay with us. There are countless more chapters of forgotten innovation waiting to be told. Tales of courage, improvisation, and the human drive to protect one's own that don't always make the headlines or the textbooks. To Marcus Donovan, Donald Williams, Robert Hayes, and the thousands of GIs who trusted their lives to 3 welded magazines in the spring of 1945, thank you. Your story matters. Your legacy lives in every modern squad that advances under covering fire, in every tactical doctrine that prioritizes suppression and maneuver. You turned the tide one burst at a time.
Looking back from decades later, it's easy to see why the triple-magazine grease gun captured the imagination of those who knew about it, soldiers, historians, collectors alike. It wasn't a revolutionary new weapon dropped from the skies by ordnance wizards in Washington. It was raw, grassroots problem-solving, GIs and their armorers spotting a lethal gap in firepower and closing it with torches, welders, and sheer determination. In an army of millions, equipped with the finest industrial output the world had ever seen, this small modification reminded everyone that wars are ultimately won or lost by the men on the ground, adapting in real time to the enemy's tricks. The M3 grease gun itself deserves a moment in the spotlight here. Designed in 1942 by George Hyde and rushed into production at Guide Lamp Division of General Motors, it embodied America's wartime philosophy. Good enough, cheap enough, and lots of them. The Thompson was a masterpiece. Milled steel, walnut stocks, finned barrel, but at $200 apiece in Depression-era dollars, it was unsustainable for total war. The M3, with its stamped parts, wire stock, and minimalist design, cost a tenth as much and could be cranked out by the hundreds of thousands. Tank crews loved it for its compactness inside turrets. Paratroopers appreciated the reliability in airborne dust and mud. Infantry carried it when close work was expected. But no one pretended it was a long-range suppressor. Its slow rate of fire, intentionally designed low to control ammunition use and improve accuracy, made it steady in bursts but limited in sustained output compared to belt-feds. That's precisely where the triple magazine bridged the gap. It didn't turn the grease gun into an MG42 clone. The cyclic rate stayed the same, the .45 ACP ballistics unchanged. What it did was eliminate the Achilles heel of detachable magazine weapons, the reload pause. In modern terms, it gave a submachine gun the alpha in a close-quarters engagement, the ability to maintain fire longer than the opponent expects. German doctrine trained gunners to count enemy bursts and exploit the lull. American soldiers, with their improvised triples, robbed them of that timing. Historians today, poring over unit diaries and ordnance reports, estimate the modification's impact conservatively. Across the First Army's sector from February to May 1945, the reduced casualty rates in bunker and building clearances likely saved hundreds of lives, perhaps low thousands when aggregated across similar unofficial mods in other armies and theaters. No medal was struck for it, no official commendation beyond that cautious memorandum. Yet in the quiet math of war, where every percentage point reduction in losses translates to men going home, it mattered profoundly. The legacy ripples forward in ways few realize. Post-war small arms evolution accelerated toward higher capacity feeds. The British Sten guns saw similar field mods with dual magazines. Soviet PPSH 41 drum magazines influenced later AK designs. When the US developed the M14 and then M16, extended 30-round magazines became standard partly because veterans remembered how 20 rounds in Korea felt too few. Belt-fed squad weapons like the M60 and later M249 institutionalized the concept. One gunner provides the endless storm, so the rest of the team can maneuver.
Collectors and reenactors keep the flame alive. At gun shows and military vehicle meets, a genuine triple-mag M3 draws crowds like few other World War II artifacts. Prices for transferable examples climb into six figures when they rarely surface. Forums and books dedicated to field expedients feature chapters on it. Reenactment units occasionally fabricate replicas, carefully deactivated, for living history displays, complete with period-correct welds and paint marks. One such story comes from a 1990s reunion of the 1st Infantry Division. A group of veterans gathered in a VFW hall, swapping tales over coffee. When someone brought out a photograph of triple-mag guns in use, the room went quiet for a moment. Then the stories poured out, how the extra weight blistered shoulders on long marches, how cleaning 3 magazines instead of 1 ate into precious rest time, but how carrying that bulky assembly felt like insurance against the worst moments. One old sergeant summed it up: "We weren't inventors. We were just trying not to die." Turns out, not dying is pretty good motivation. Another angle often overlooked is the human element in those frontline armories. Picture a freezing February night in Verviers, Belgium. A maintenance company sergeant, maybe a former auto mechanic from Detroit, works by lantern light alongside a couple of privates. They've got a stack of empty magazines, a captured German welder running off a Jeep battery, and casualty reports fresh from the line urging haste. No blueprints, no safety testing beyond. Does it hold together when I shake it? Just trial, error, and the knowledge that tomorrow morning some kid from Ohio or Texas will trust his life to their handiwork. That's the American war machine at its most visceral, not vast factories alone, but individual initiative backed by unlimited material. The triple magazine also highlights a broader truth about World War II innovations. Many of the war's most effective tools started as unauthorized hacks. Duckbill fuses on Sherman tanks for hedgerow cutting, rhinoceros prongs for beach obstacles, sandbag armor on half-tracks, even the famous Hobart's funnies, specialized vehicles that began as one man's bright ideas. Bureaucracy eventually caught up, standardized, and scaled them, or didn't, in cases like this where peace arrived first. In the end, the story of the triple magazine M3 grease gun is less about the metal and welds than about the men who needed it and the men who built it. Staff Sergeant Marcus Donovan, back in Pittsburgh's mills after the war, never sought spotlight for his part. He lived the quiet life of the citizen soldier: work hard, raise a family, coach baseball, vote in every election. Only in private moments, showing that attic photograph to wide-eyed grandkids, did he let the pride show. See those 3 magazines stuck together? Looks silly, right? But in February 45, in that frozen forest, silly saved lives. Private Donald Williams carried his Silver Star citation folded in his wallet for decades, but rarely mentioned the specific action that earned it. In his hardware store, customers knew him as the guy who could fix anything with whatever parts were on hand, advice always free with purchase. When school groups came through on history projects, he'd pull out a replica magazine cluster he'd built himself and let kids hold it, explaining weight and balance like a shop class lesson. War's mostly waiting and walking, he'd say, but when it's not, you need every second you can get. Their generation didn't dwell on glory. They fixed problems, won the war, came home, built the post-war world. Innovations like the triple magazine were just part of the job, necessary, effective, then packed away when no longer needed. But for those who study the details, who appreciate how narrow margins decided so many fights, it stands as a perfect emblem. Simple, practical, born of necessity, and quietly decisive. If you followed this deep dive from that frozen foxhole on Valentine's Day 1945 through to victory and beyond, you've seen how one small adaptation rippled through battles, saved lives, and influenced tactics long after the guns went silent. These are the stories that connect us directly to the past. Not grand strategies or famous names, but ordinary men doing extraordinary things with whatever they had. The endless storm may have lasted only a few months, but its echo carries forward in every modern firefight where suppression buys time for maneuver, in every squad weapon designed to keep fire going while brothers advance. It's a reminder that innovation often comes not from laboratories, but from the front line, under fire, when stopping isn't an option. Thank you for joining this journey through a forgotten corner of military history. Stories like this deserve to be told and retold, not for drama, but for truth. They honor the ingenuity, courage, and sacrifice of a generation that faced impossible odds and found ways through. To every soldier who welded, carried, or fought alongside a triple magazine grease gun, your resourcefulness helped bring the boys home. We remember. We honor you. And we carry the lesson forward, that when the math doesn't favor you, sometimes you rewrite the equation yourself.